Jumping right in this morning. Want to show you a picture. Jeff's going to put it up on the screen. Who knows who this is? Harrison Ford. A couple of you. A couple of you scared to just scream it out. You're like, I might be wrong. Harrison Ford. Y'all remember reading about him in the Bible, right? Oh, y'all know me. I'll use anything to connect the dots and make things relevant for you. This is Harrison Ford. Believe it or not, not sure about this picture, but he is 80 years old. It's hard to believe that, but Harrison Ford this year turned 80 years. I didn't realize this until I started looking it up. 80 years old, but I had heard his story before, and I thought it might be appropriate to get us started here today. He's a Hollywood superstar, as you know. He's not hurting for anything, not financially at least. But back in the 1960s, this guy Harrison Ford, for several years during the 60s, he was trying to find his way. He was this young actor who was trying to find these parts and in movies and anywhere he could in Hollywood. And these two picture companies that you might know called Paramount and Universal gave him a shot. And they gave him these little side gigs, kind of a contract player, if you will. And this meant that he played these small parts and occasionally in movies and roles and made a little bit of money doing so. Well, unfortunately, he wasn't making enough to live off of. In fact, one of his first contracts was $150 a week acting. Now, we know how it ends. It turned out okay for him, but this is how he started out. He was married with a wife, he had a child and a home, and he realized that this meager acting salary just wasn't going to cut it back in the 60s. So he decided, okay, I got to go find something else to bring home the bacon. So he had done some carpentry work before, whether you knew this about him, and he started building cabinets. He started building cabinets with a friend of his, and while doing so, he was working through books and studying to be a better actor and a better carpenter. They say he self-taught himself in many ways, both in acting and in carpentry work. He put in the effort, and for the better part of 10 years, he kind of worked bivocationally, if you will, between being an actor and being a carpenter, a cabinet builder. Well, one day, Ford was installing cabinets for director Francis Ford Coppola. And he's building these cabinets for this director. And as he's working, he runs into this guy named George Lucas. And George Lucas meets him and decides to, in a conversation, is like, hey, I could really use a guy like you for a small role. Talking with Lucas, Ford remembers this moment well. It was the moment that would end up changing his life. He had done some acting. He had done some small roles. But you see, Lucas was casting this film, and he needed Harrison Ford's help with a little thing called Star Wars. You know what happened next. Lucas had these actors lined up, and he needed some extras. And he honestly talked to Harrison Ford about just being an extra, just playing a small role. He was like, hey, man, I know you build cabinets on the side, but I could really use you in a side gig here just to play an extra in this movie I'm working on. As a matter of fact, if you study it, people say he was simply a reader at first. Didn't even have an on-screen part. He just was a voiceover. And in one of the most famous examples of Hollywood rags to riches stories, Harrison Ford, the carpenter, becomes Han Solo, the character. And the story today lives on. The Star Wars saga continues to live on, still releasing new films and shows even today. I share this story not because Harrison Ford has anything to do with the Bible, as we jokingly pointed out earlier, but I share it because he had this big break that came into his life and his acting career right when he thought that maybe it was just over. I imagine a man that goes through the better part of a decade, raising a family, working as a carpenter, trying to make his way into Hollywood in these little side gigs he's getting. And then he gets this part as a reader, that they just say, hey, we just need you to read these parts. And he's probably thinking, man, I bet his wife was thinking it. Oh, y'all don't have spouses like that, huh? Never met people. I bet his wife's like, come on, enough with your little crazy antics, your dreams you're chasing. You got a family to raise. Excuse me. But yet he kept doing these same parts. And just when he maybe felt like giving up, when all hope was lost, he met someone that would change his life forever. We're going to be in John chapter 11 today. I want to read a familiar story to you. Lots of text this morning, but it tells the whole story as we talk about the giver of life today. John chapter 11, beginning in verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, come on, we know this story well. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Verse 27, yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Verse 32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Would have given it to him, right? When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man had kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. I'd say she speaks truth, right? Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." May God add his blessing to his word today. The Lazarus story is a beautiful one that all of us probably know. You probably learned it as a child, perhaps, and maybe you heard it in kids' church growing up or Sunday school or been taught it or just read it yourself many times. And it's told in John chapter 11 here. It teaches us numerous lessons about having faith, about the power of Jesus, and also about the hope in the giver of life. One of the lessons that I want us to focus on is the very same idea that in this moment of Lazarus' death, when all hope seemed lost, hope nonetheless remained. In this text, it works very hard. The author here, John, works very hard to present to the reader just how hopeless things were. Let me give you some examples. For one, the text makes the case that this was hopeless by pointing out the fact that he had been dead for 4 days. He's been dead for 4 days by the time Jesus arrives. And that's significant, especially because in this culture, the Jewish culture, they thought that after day 3 that his spirit had certainly left his body. This meant that from their perspective, by day 3, not only was his spirit gone, but his body was certainly lifeless. Secondly, Mary and Martha, who were Lazarus' sisters and Jesus' good friends, they meet him with the same sentiment. Jesus, if you had been here, Lazarus would not be dead today. Another example in the picture of a lack of hope. Jesus, if you had been here, we would not be facing this today. Thirdly, when Jesus speaks to them about the possibility of life after death, they certainly believe that their brother Lazarus can live again and will live again. But they're referencing the resurrection. For them, all hope in their current context was lost. They would never speak to their brother again or see him full of life anymore. Every time Jesus said, "Your brother will live," well, of course he will. They understood what the resurrection meant. And then finally, as Jesus, Mary, and Martha arrive at this tomb, one of the greatest fears they have is of the stench of death that will be about his body if he's removed. That shows you right there again. There's 4 reasons, 4 examples of the fact that how hopeless this situation is. I think we can deduct from this, from their concerns, from what they offered to this story, Mary and Martha, we can deduct that Lazarus was dead. He was gone. In his earthly form, his life was over. And over, John chapter 11 points out and makes it clear that he was gone. His body even starting to decompose as his sisters feared. The only problem with this text is, and there is a problem with this text, they were wrong. The sisters were wrong. All those who wept were wrong. And I dare to say that we do the same thing today. Naturally and logically, we regularly look around and we take stock of our life and our situation, maybe something you're dealing with. Maybe you're dealing with something now and you look around at your circumstances and the situation that you're in and you're like, there's no hope. Just me, huh? I have looked at people in my life who are far from God, and I have made the statement, knowing who I know God to be, I've made the statement, I just don't know that there's any hope for them. Anybody else said that? You don't have to raise your hand, unless you want to. You look at somebody and you're like, man, there's no hope for that guy. we look around and we take stock of what's going on, and I think we can connect with the story of Mary and Martha. Maybe not in the regards to physical death, but some type of life experience that we've encountered or are encountering or may encounter one day. Based on where we know how everything is going, and we look around our circumstances in our life and say, there's just no reason for me to care anymore. It's over. It's done. I'm speaking to you about moments in a job where you've done everything you can and it just seems like the situation is not going to be resolved. I'm speaking of moments in marriages and relationships when you've given everything you can of yourself and the other person just isn't meeting you halfway. It's irreconcilable at this point. I'm thinking of times with children that maybe you've almost given up on. Children that you've helped to raise them the best you can, and you're like, well, they're on their own. God, it's in your hands now. If you've ever made those statements about somebody in your life, it's kind of like you're, yes, number one, trusting God, and you're thinking, there's nothing I can do, but it's also kind of an admission of lack of hope, right? That's okay. I'm not preaching at you. I'm just, we've all been there. Maybe I'm describing a situation where you experienced maybe a loved one that went to a doctor. Maybe it was you that went to a doctor and got some news that you didn't expect. And all of a sudden, it seemed like all hope was gone. Junior, you ever been there? Junior, you got that sheet? You got that paper? Pull that pad. Y'all know Junior came into the church a couple of years ago, and God saved his life and has changed him and made him a new man, and he's battled cancer. There's times that you lost hope. I know you did. You've told me. He just didn't believe he's going to live another day. And he wrote me this note and showed it to me this morning and said, the doctor told me whatever I was doing to keep on doing it. I don't have to go back and see him till January. Just for the CT scan. No treatments until something comes up because they can't find a thing. Hope was lost for Junior. I watched him with tears in his eyes share concern and fear with me, not knowing if he'd wake up the next day. You said those words to me. Well, none of us are promised tomorrow, right? We go through these situations and we deal with grief maybe. We deal with pain and things that are going on. And I tell you what, man, we packing shoe boxes. There was times I'd had a little bit of hope and a whole lot of faith. I was like, man, I hope we can do this. I hope we can do this. And all these occasions in our life are times when hope has just walked out the door. And it seems inevitable that it's just going to finish the way it is. And nothing's going to change. Now, the last thing I want to do today is give you a false sense of hope. That's a real thing. I don't want to give you a false sense of hope. Because God doesn't change things like we want him to in every situation. I don't care how hard you pray, how much faith you have. Sadly, it doesn't always work out for people that have gone through the situation that Junior's had. Not the way they want it to. But the truth is that things may not change in your situation. And that's okay. That might be correct. But here's what I want to do. I want to leave with you today. Here's what I want to say. And I believe this with all my heart. With Jesus in our lives, hope still remains even in the bleakest of moments. I don't care what you're facing. I don't care what situation you're in. Maybe it's marital. Maybe it's relational. Maybe it's financial. Maybe it's a job situation. Maybe it's with your kids. Maybe it's with the unsaved people in your life. You've almost given up. Maybe it's with grief you're dealing with. Maybe it's a medical report that you got. I don't know what you're in that's got you in a difficult spot and you're backed in a corner. If Christ is in your life and on your side, don't lose hope. Harrison Ford never stopped, and it paid off for him. I know that's just a cultural example. Worldly, I get that. But then look at Lazarus. Look how it worked out for him and his family. You telling me his sisters hadn't give up? They wept. Jesus even cried, knowing what God was about to do through him. It was a sad moment. All hope is gone in that place and in that occasion. There's going to be times in your life that you're going to feel like hope is gone. And the situation is not going to change. And you know what? It's not going to. I'm not going to promise you anything. I'm going to be real. That door is going to close and there ain't going to be nothing you can do to reopen it. That person is going to walk out of your life and there's nothing you can do to bring them back. That bill is going to still have to be paid and there's nothing you can do to make it disappear. That person you've prayed for your whole life to see God change them, they may not ever give in to his grace. You'll have moments like that. But at the very same time, we must continue to be followers of the one who is the giver of life. And trust in him. And in those moments when we feel like we've lost all hope and all we can do is cry, all you can do is cry. You can't even have, they didn't even have words to say. If you had been here, you ever said that to the Lord? God, if you would have been here, I wouldn't be in this situation. Let me tell you something. God sees you right where you are. He sees you. We serve a great God. I preached it last week. The great God that created the universe and all the stars that are in it. He sees you right where you are. Have faith in him. Put your hope in him. He is the giver of life. God's hope teaches us something. It teaches us that when doors close, and sometimes they do, maybe, just maybe, he's working to open another one. Not always. God's the giver of life. He's not the taker of life. That's not what he created us for. But when you look at the Lazarus story, that seems to fit too, because the door had closed for them, they felt. It was over. Life was over for Lazarus. And Jesus literally reopened the door. Hope is a fragile thing. I understand that. It's a very fragile thing. Because you can have so much of it, and then yet things just crumble around you. I understand that. As we go through life, we'll go through triumphs, we'll go through tragedies, we'll go through highs, we'll go through lows. You've all been there, right? Maybe you're there this morning. But we sang a song this morning that says, step by step. Let me tell you something. Every step you take, he is there with you. And you can put your hope and your trust in him. When you can't turn to anybody else, you can put your trust in him. I've watched God heal relationships that I've been a part of mediating and counseling in. And there's nothing I could do, Carl. Like, I'd given all I could, man. Every bit of expert advice and scriptural advice I could give, I had offered. And I was like, well, God, I hope you're going to step in, because I'm about ready to step out. I've done all I can. I lost hope in things. And I've watched God bring healing to that. There's been times when I've had people come to me as the pastor and just open themselves up and empty themselves out in despair, in discouragement, in frustration, in hopelessness. And Randy, there's only so much I can say, right? I'm human. That's when I just have to encourage. We have to encourage one another. I have to encourage them and say, hey, don't lose hope. It might not work out the way you expect it to or want it to. But I'm going to tell you right now, the journey is a whole lot easier when you've got the one who gives life walking beside you, holding your hand step by step of the way. I promise you. Your story might not turn out like Harrison Ford's. It might not turn out like Lazarus. But I promise you, if you maintain hope and faith in Him, the giver of life, He will sustain you through whatever circumstances present themselves in your situation. I promise you He will. I promise you He will.